Hey everyone, welcome to Writer's Realm Podcast, and thank you for joining us as we journey through writing together. We're your hosts, Bob Adato,
Holly Robilliard.
And Austin Matthews.
and today we're going to talk about common traps for new writers with Matt Struvan. Hey, welcome, Matt.
Hello again.
Hello again. Hey, so we're saying again, and I just want to laugh and kick myself because we went for about 10 minutes before I realized I had not pressed the record button. So we had to start over. So now that we're all practiced on just talking and highlighting, and anyway, here we are again. Matt, so tell us all about yourself. What do you do?
Well, for fun, I am an aspiring author. I write, what did I say before? Now I got to keep everything consistent. 500 words a day. Yeah, so aspiring author. Do you want me to tell you about my project again?
Yes, 100%.
Okay, awesome. Now everybody else gets to hear it. So right now, my current work in progress is a high fantasy. I feel like I should be super practiced at this now, but it is about a king who dies, and they live in a secular kingdom, so there's no magic. No one knows anything about magic, and the kingship is thrust upon the prince, and the prince is a drunk and kind of an asshole, and he uses people, and so he has to learn how to be responsible and mature. In the midst of this, a mage shows up to their kingdom, and no one again knows about magic because it's a secular kingdom, and they're like, wait, why is magic happening? What is this? And he's casting runes, which is my main source of magic in the book. And then a war breaks out with a neighboring country, and you'll have to read the rest if you or you have to buy it if you want to read the rest.
Now, my ears heard, and then a maid shows up, but I don't think you said that.
Mage.
I thought like a maid.
It's not a mage.
Right.
It's actually an erelaz, which is the word that I use in my title and the name that they call themselves. But an erelaz is a rune caster from up in the Northlands.
Nice.
I actually really like the fact that there isn't any magic to start with, because I feel like most of the books that I read, magic is already established and like it's a very big part of the community. So I feel like that for you must open a ton of doors. Like you're allowed to explain things like the world building. You can do whatever you want with it. It's not set in stone. That's awesome. I really like that concept.
Yeah, and it also gives you a nice learning curve too.
Yeah. So I'm kind of learning about the magic as I'm writing it, but like you said, the world building is a little bit easier because I can explain things. But I would say, like, plotline speaking, it's difficult because even though he's learning about magic, it's still like most of the world still doesn't know magic. So every time he does something, everyone is like freaking out and like running away and like scared and like, what is this? And then so it's leaving some doors open for interesting plot lines.
That's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. So where can we find you? Where can listeners find where you're at?
Well, I live in my house. So I'm not going to.
Okay. Okay, that's for later. Then we'll get that later.
If you want to find me on Instagram, you can find me MJ Struvan, Struven. There I post actually, so it's like family pictures and cute stuff. You can see my amazing life and my baby. But then also I do reels because I also have an author interviews channel on YouTube, which you can find me. I think it's called Author Interviews with MJ Struvan. I'm pretty sure there's not a ton of people doing author interviews, so if you just YouTube that, I'll probably be one of the top 100 that show up.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that for about a year now, and yeah, we were just talking. Robert was about my third guest, so I've been doing it for a while now.
I think we met on Reddit. Is that right, Matt?
We did, yes.
Yeah, I think you put it out there, and that was fun. So yeah, I hope you got like a bunch of other people from that signed up from Reddit.
Yeah, I get them from a lot of different places. I do make posts on Reddit every couple of months looking for people. I've been super booked out for like 4 or 5 months now, like 2 interviews a week.
Good for you.
Wow.
So there's a lot of interest in it. People definitely want to talk about themselves. All authors are conceited. One of my favorite quotes is, and don't ask me who it's by, but it's writing is an act of ego, and we might as well admit it. It's because all us authors, we think what's going on in our head is so important that we need to write it down so other people can see what's going on in our head too.
Yeah, that's true. Or it's like, oh, I read this and this, I could do this so much better. I could do it somewhat, this like top of the charts author, I could do a way better job than them. I'm going to write a book.
That is true. That might be a new common trap here that we'll talk about in a little bit. That's absolutely.
I think even maybe last week or a week before, I talked about being like reading Pierce Brown's Red Rising, being like so disappointed by something that happened, and like, okay, I'm gonna have to use the thing I thought was gonna happen in my book. So
Right. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Okay. So we're all new writers. I have 3 books published. Writing number 4. Austin, you're very active with the Kindle. What is that called?
the Kindle Vela.
Bella. Yeah. Gosh, I always forget the name of it. But you see, I mean, you've got tons of work there, right? Where people can find you.
Yeah. So I'm still trying to get back in the thick of it. I was doing 3 chapters a week, so right now I'm doing 1 chapter a week, trying to build up steam to finish out one of my books. So
Okay. All right. So, and then Holly, you're working on at least one. You said you're almost done, right, with your November project with
Yeah, I have my trilogy is kind of off to the side right now. It's waiting in the wings for me to finish my November project, which I'm 2 chapters away from finishing. I'm so close. I'm actually like a chapter and a half because I got half of the second last chapter done. So I'm like so close. So I can't wait to finish that up so I can toss it to the side and jump back over to the Blood Sky and get that going. So
okay. So we're
Okay,
all
and-
basically what'd you have,
I
Matt?
was just gonna say, like, I'm gonna throw it out there. Holly mentioned trilogy, so is your first thing that you wanted to work on, and I'm gonna say I fell for the same trap
Okay.
initially. Was I wanted to start with a series because I had this big idea, but
Okay.
I mean, if you got somewhere else to start, I'm all ears.
Well, ooh, that's a nice cup. Can you show everybody your cup?
Oh yeah,
I sent my co-host special
Ooh, that's
cups with
cool.
our new logo, with our new The Writer's Realm logo on them.
it makes me
Those
so
are
happy.
amazing. But yeah, so I mean, we're all new writers pretty much. I've been published since 2021. So basically, I'm sure all of us are within 5 years, right? We've been like actively trying to be professional writers, right? Or a little bit longer, or anyway, we're all new, kind of, sort of. So, but yeah, so common traps. I mean, Austin, you already had something you wanted to start with, which would be what?
Yeah, I think a common trap that, people fall for is like letting their ideas almost get away from them and be like, oh, this isn't a single story. It's got to be this big whole thing. And like, I think part of that for me is that like, I can't publish any of that until I finished all of it, was like something I fell for, is like, I'm just going to keep writing and writing and writing. And it's like that world building paralysis of I just need more and more, and everything needs to be 100% solid before I can ever think about even publishing.
Okay. Anybody else here? On that?
Yeah,
I wrote down
go
after
ahead,
you.
please.
All right,
Guest
I'm the
always
guest.
wins.
I'll go. Yeah, I wrote down a few things that kind of fall into that realm, writer's realm, some might say. Not starting until you're ready. Because I mean, what is ready? Like,
Yeah.
you could always outline more. You could always fix a little bit more dialogue. Like, you just need to sit down and write. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, not just for new authors, but also continuing authors, is like sitting down and putting in the time every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and like you said, you shoot for 500 words a day, and like I think a lot of people will be like, "Oh, but it's only 500 words a day." But it's like you think about 500 words a day over a year, it's 180,000 words. That's a
Yeah.
lot of words.
That's
Like,
a lot.
I mean, I don't often read books that are that long, so whenever you're thinking about it in that kind of a mindset, like you can write 2 books a year at that pace,
Yeah.
realistically.
What'd you have, Holly?
I was just gonna say, I think that that's a common thing for people is they say that you shouldn't start with a trilogy, you shouldn't start with a series, you should actually start with short stories, and then from there maybe do a standalone novel, and then from there you can, once you establish like your writing styles and you kind of get in the swing of things, then you can move on to a trilogy. I obviously didn't do that. I just dove headfirst right into a trilogy. And I get it. It's because by writing short stories, you learn to condense your story down into something. You're only talking about the details that are actually really important, and you're not wasting time and space trying to fill pages so that you have enough to write a 3-book trilogy. But at the same time, I didn't do that, and I hate writing short stories. And I feel like by going through and doing an entire novel, I was better able to understand my pacing. So I get that, but I'm also like, well, I mean, I think it can go both ways.
It's funny because you mentioned like, oh, the whole point is to like learn this skill. everybody I've ever heard talk about, like, don't start with a series or a trilogy, like, always talks about, oh, no publisher wants to pick up an untested author on a trilogy or a series. And it's like, I feel like that's a trap that we fall for, is that like our writing is to be sold. Like, if we can't fall in love with the writing that we're doing for the sake of doing it, like, that is such a trap in itself, of like selling out from the very get-go and not even worrying about the story that you want to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to decide, are you doing it for art or for a business? And neither one of those is wrong. But you need to be clear about why you're doing it, because if you're doing it for art and it could take 20 years, and with you, that's fine. But if you're like, this is a business, I need to do it every day. I need to push out 1,000 words. I need to get my editor. I need to do all this stuff. Like, it's very different expectations of yourself. So be honest with yourself about what you want.
Yeah. And like, you'll be writing very differently and writing potentially very different things too. Because if you're trying to write to the market, you know, that's going to change really quickly. And you have to get books out in a lot faster, like have a higher turnaround or faster turnaround, goodness. Just to, in order to, like, you know, strike the iron while it's hot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Yeah, I think it's pretty common. The one thing I see a lot, because I'm on Reddit all the time, is that I see a lot of people trying to get most of the time it's their first chapter, but they're trying to get their entire book absolutely perfect. And we're just talking about the first draft too. Like, they have no idea, like, no, it's supposed to be a mess, okay? Like, it's going to be just not necessarily junk and not necessarily a huge mess, but it's going to be messy. It's not going to be perfect. I mean, I think that's the common trap, is I need to get this absolutely perfect the first time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think if we're honest, it's going to be a dumpster fire the first time. Like, especially like if you're looking at like new writers, like the first draft of your first novel ever, like, there's no way it's going to come out great. Like, I don't even know. I can't even think of any examples of like, oh yeah, I just like threw this together and it was great. Like, no, like, people work hard at this. Like, it's not just something that you can slap together and hope for the best. Like, you really, it's a lot of work, and like, it's okay. That's why we have editing. That's why we go through drafts. Like, you can slap together a terrible process or a terrible first draft, and like, you know, over the next year, get it into something that's presentable.
Well, I've got a
Matt, I know
question for you guys.
Okay, you first.
Well, you were going to ask me a question. I love
I
being
was
asked
going to ask you a question.
There you go.
Yeah, so speaking of like the first chapter and the first draft, so you're working on your second book right now. Is there anything that you have done differently from when you did that first chapter of that first novel to this one?
Mhm. Yeah, that's actually a great question. So the first novel, for a little context, I wrote that in 2016 or so. It's been sitting on the shelf for quite a while. That book, it starts off pretty slow. I would say the entire first chapter is probably like 10 pages. It's not like an incredibly long chapter, but there's no dialogue. And I did that on purpose. So I don't think the no dialogue in and of itself, is a poor choice. But it's a very slow start. And this book, by the end of the first chapter, which is probably about 5 pages, there's already a sexual tension in the scene that did not go anywhere, but there is that, and then also somebody dies. So it's just very different in the pacing of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what did you have, Matt? You had a question for all of us.
Yeah, I did. So one trap that everyone always touts is, oh, this is like the worst thing to do as an author, is editing as you go. And I have to edit as I go. I was an English major. Like, I cannot let a poor sentence sit there. So what do you guys think? Do you think editing as you go is the correct way or the wrong way to do it?
I will say I am in two minds. So like, I think it's if it's going to be something that like hinders you, like if I'm going to be thinking about something, I need to go back and think about it, or like rework it and do those things. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to move forward. But like, at the same time, it's like, if it's not something that's pressing, well, then maybe I can move on. And so it kind of depends, you know, sentence by sentence, chapter by chapter, where it's like, I'll have some chapters where I'm like, okay, I'm going to leave this one at like 2 paragraphs of like an outline, essentially, because I don't know what I'm doing here and I need to go work on something else. And so like, I think it really depends on where I'm at on a particular day.
Yeah, that's actually a really good one, because that was something when I first started writing my first book, really, really screwed me up, because I would go through and I would edit everything. Like, I would write one page and then go back through and be like, is this really how they felt? Or is this what I thought? Or And I was never getting anywhere. Like I was working on it for ages, it felt like, and I just wasn't making any progress. So part of the reason I actually started with my November project was I did something completely different. And I was like, I'm not going to edit anything. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to write. I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to look any, like if I'm on this line, I'm not looking at whatever's back here. So it was really hard for me, but it really worked because again, I'm 2 chapters away from finishing this book finally.
Mm.
But it's really hard. And there is some like later on, because I did an outline, and later on, some of the outline just didn't make sense with the way that things played out in my story. So there are some spots now where it's like, put more detail in here about this because you haven't fleshed out this character enough and you don't know what their response is actually going to be. So some of that stuff I really struggle with because I want it all written out. But again, it's the first draft. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and it's hard. I flip flop, because I know it's my first draft and I'm writing and writing and writing, but then there's like, there's got to be a better word for this, so I just sit there and stare at the wall, or rearrange a sentence or two, and then I remind myself, okay, wait, this is first draft. Keep going, keep going, keep going, because I got to get to the end. I have to write the end, and then I'm all happy. Then I can go back and now I can restructure everything, which is going to happen anyways, right? I mean, because that's why this is a common trap for new writers, because you're trying to make this perfect, but you're going to go all the way back to the beginning of it. Once you write the end, you're going to go all the way to chapter 1 and you're going to start changing stuff all over again. So like all that work is almost like, what for, right?
Yeah. I will say something I've done to kind of appease my inner editor is that like before I sit down to write a new chapter, I'm very likely will go to the previous chapter to reread it anyways. So I'll go ahead and edit it while I'm rereading it. And then cool, I've got it perfectly fresh in my mind what I have on that page so I can go into the next chapter.
Yeah, I don't think there's a correct or an incorrect way to do it. I think you just need to be mindful of your pacing as an author, not the pacing of the book, but pacing as what you're writing. Like if I'm on a roll, I'm not going to stop and rearrange sentences. And in fact, if I have ideas for like my next few paragraphs and I'm stuck on a paragraph, I will just put like a little note on the side, like revisit, and then just skip it. So that's a good way to do it as well.
Yeah, dropping comments in there is so awesome. Like the number of times where I've like, oh yeah, I think I finished this book. Let me go search. And I'm like, oh, there's a note where like, hey, I had no idea what to do in this chapter. Insert a scene where like I make these 2 characters closer. I'm like, oh, okay. Thanks, past Austin.
That's funny. Yeah. So I mean, we got 3. What do we have so far? We have edit as you go, making the first draft perfect. What was the first one we talked about?
We talked about whether you should start with a single standalone thing or
a trilogy
series.
I think another really interesting thing, maybe this isn't necessarily a trap, but is forgetting that your characters have lives when they're off scene. So I've read a lot of like alpha reads or a lot of beta reads for people, and their characters, like if your chapter ends, say it's chapter 2 is over and you're switching to a new character's point of view, and a couple weeks pass, and then chapter 5, that other character comes back into the picture, and 5 weeks have passed, but you're acting like this character, like they've done nothing in between the end of that chapter and the beginning of this chapter. And you can tell because it's like, why haven't these characters progressed at all? And I think that is wise because people forget, like, just because you're not writing about them doesn't mean that they don't have, their lives are happening still. So maybe not necessarily a trap, but just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I will say that does kind of fall into like a bigger trap of like having characters that aren't really characters, they are roles in the story. And so they aren't well rounded. They just like, oh, my main character needs this other person to do this thing. So I'm going to have a love interest. And that is the entirety of that character is they're playing the role of the love interest, or the character is playing the role of the antagonist. It's not like any sort of depth to them. And so I think that's a big trap of like, I need a role filled. So this blank canvas is going to serve as that. And like, just don't look at it sideways because you'll see how flat it is.
Okay. How about you, Matt? What have you either experienced or researched common traps for a new writer?
Let's see here. I did write down a bunch of stuff. let's see here. I think kind of going off what you were talking about, Austin, making one-dimensional characters with no or poor motives for their actions, like just strictly good guys and bad guys are boring. You should at least explore why people are quote unquote good or bad, or if morally gray is how I like to draw most of my characters.
Yeah, we just talked about that in our like our favorite tropes is morally
Top 10.
gray.
Top 10
Yeah.
fantasy tropes. Yeah.
That's right. So I think
Okay.
morally gray is just not automatically, usually more interesting. So I like nuance.
Yeah, I totally get that too. I think that a lot of the times, like that's one of the biggest things. Like I will read a bad book if the characters are good. Like not like good, but if they're well-written characters, I'll read a bad book. Because that's what we like, right? We have characters so that our readers have something to relate to. And so if you have a really good character like that and they're well-rounded and they're well-written, that's all that you really need. I mean, to carry you through. I mean, don't write a bad book, please, and just put good characters, but you know what I mean? Like you can get through with a lot more if you have good characters. But you're absolutely right, is so many people just don't put enough thought or care into those character arcs. They don't care about the characters, they don't think about their backgrounds, they don't think about their futures. They just have a character that's kind of just being pulled along as a way to move the plot forward.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the hard thing about becoming a new writer is that like there's like if you're on a path and there's a ditch on either end because it's like, oh, I didn't put enough thought into my character and I didn't tell the people, like the readers, enough about what was going on with the background of this character. But then it's like, oh man, you give me way too much exposition. I didn't need to know all of this about your character. Like I don't need their life story in order to understand what's happening in the first chapter, please. So I think, almost everything we talk about, there's going to be ditches on either side of like, oh, I didn't edit at all as I went through, and I don't even know what I was trying to say in the rough draft. But then there's also obviously the I edited for so long I never got out of the first sentence because I heard the first sentence was the most important.
Oh, yeah. Where did we cover that? We just covered that, right? About the first sentence being a hook. It needs to be a hook. I don't know. Within the last.
Yeah, we talked about the first chapter, and we talked about the first
yeah.
sentence and how important it was or not important it was.
Right.
So.
I think another
building off.
You too. Always.
Who has a talking stick? No, go ahead.
I was going to say, building off of what Austin was saying a little bit ago about depth in characters, I think you have to be careful about having too many characters. I would rather see fewer characters that have depth than 50 characters where, like you said, they're just playing the role. Like a lot of people will read, George R.R. Martin or something, be like, oh man, he has like 1,000 characters. And it's like, okay, well, but are you George R.R. Martin?
Right.
Probably not.
No.
There's one of them.
Yep.
And on top of
Great
it,
points.
were all the characters necessary? Like, are there two characters that you could combine and serve the same purpose? And would that serve the story a little bit better? Yeah, maybe, but you should explore how you can do that and eliminate the cast. Like even in epic fantasy where there's a lot of grace for having 1,000+ characters in a series. If you have 1,000+ characters, you are going to have like a wiki page as a necessity, which is, maybe not what most people want in their reading process.
Right.
Yeah, that was something I learned too, because I know we had talked about this already, but just Matt, to fill you in, I had a character that I wrote in my first 5 chapters, and then I made it to like chapter 30 something and realized that I had not mentioned this character at all. And I was like, well, I guess they're not that important because I just completely forgot about them. So I'm like, that's a perfect example of a character that was there just to serve my plot, and his role could go to somebody else.
Yeah. These are great so far. Common traps for new writers. I'm thinking of. Oh, what? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just carry the conversation more. That's fine. I feel like one thing that you guys were kind of alluding to with character development would also be like world building. And so you want to make sure that you're not overburdening your reader with tons of information that is not necessarily to the plot itself. Like there is a time and a place to write the Silmarillion, but it's after people have already loved Lord of the Rings and really want to know more. you don't need to throw the Silmarillion into
That's-
your trilogy.
That's huge because I did belong to, I think it was something like fantasy world building or something, subreddit, and they just kept that. Hey, is this world interesting? Is this world and but like nobody was talking about like their characters. I get like it's a subreddit for world building, we get it, but like there's nothing else going on, you know? Like this is all they want to make sure they have the magic bean sprouts and the unicorns flying through the air and the, you know what I mean? And yeah, you're right, Matt. We can get so caught up in like the gorgeousness of awesome. What was the movie we were just talking about last podcast? The beautiful movie with no
Avatar?
substance. Avatar. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful world. Like where everyone's like gaga over it. No story though. I mean, there's a perfect example.
I mean, to be fair, like, you know, did it do well when Disney did Pocahontas? Yeah. Did Avatar do well when they did it in 3D? Sure.
Sure.
And it's like, but they're like, if nobody's going to see Avatar a second time because the story was so compelling, they're going to see it because it was
Yeah.
gorgeous and like
Yeah.
undeniably so. And like, yeah, your world building might be awesome and really cool to think about, but if the story's not there and the characters aren't there,
Right.
then like it's really just a cool pitch where
Yeah.
you're like, man, I wish somebody had done something with this world and given it a cool story.
Yeah. And like, why are we reading books? Like, we don't crack open a book because the world is amazing looking or, you know, or for our imaginations as we're reading. We're not, you know what I mean? Like Dune, okay, a bunch of sand. Wow, this is fascinating. You know what I mean? Like, we want characters, right? This is why we read. We want to fall in love. We want to root for people. We want to, you
Root
know,
against people.
root against them, you know, and we just can't wait to find. We're not here to find out what happens in, you know, with the world itself. Like,
Right.
it's just.
I mean,
it can
even
be
if
too
you're talking
much.
about what happens with the world, like the world could end, but unless I care about the people in it, I don't care that that world ended.
Yeah, I'm going off of the world building as well. I think that's a big trap that people fall into is saying too much at the wrong time.
Mhm.
Not necessarily info dumpy, which I think sometimes it's okay to put that information in there. But if your character is walking through a village and they're just walking through a village to get from point A to point B, we do not need to hear all about the village unless it's actually important to your story, unless it's important to your character, unless it's important to your plot, unless it serves some purpose that we don't really need to know about. Save that information or save those big sections of description and text for a part that actually matters.
Yeah. Yeah, these are great. Too much world building. Holly, what do you have? Do you have anything? Common traps. What's the common
Well,
traps you've?
I'm going to jump off of that and say I fall into the opposite trap of like, I'm so concerned about characters and what happens to them that I sort of forget to describe the physical things that are happening.
Okay.
I think I've used this like example before, but I got to the end of a book and somebody asked me what the main character's hair color was because I had never mentioned it in the entire 135,000 words. And like, if it was a, you know, 2-page short story, fine that I don't mention it. But at some point, you should probably talk about what your main character looks like. And it's just, it's so not in my mindset. And that's the thing is like, as writers, we are not just writing for ourselves. Like as much as we are, we're also writing to let other people into this world. And so, yeah, I know what, you know, their hair color was. Like, I instantly was like, oh yeah, they're blonde. And like, didn't even have to think about it. But because I hadn't put those words on the page, my readers had no idea. And like, that's the thing is like, we have to expand into what do I like, where are my blind spots? Because I have to get, you know, beta readers in there, alpha readers in there to say, hey, like, I think you're completely missing a side of your story where I don't know if you even realize it.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
I think another big trap too is bad dialogue.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a trap or just,
Yes.
you know, a terrible skill that we don't always have.
So what does bad dialogue look like?
I have read things, and my feedback was, would you ever have this conversation with someone?
Okay.
Because if you did, you probably did not have, you don't have any friends. Because this is like, this is the most like note one, nobody talks like this. It just like it was very stiff, very awkward, and I get if that's the vibe that you're going for, but if this is like a casual conversation
Yeah.
between friends, like just sit down and think about what you talk to other people like. What is your
Mhm.
conversation like? But for some reason, when we like some people will sit down to write out dialogue, and it just they're trying to make something happen in the conversation, and so because
Mhm.
there's like again like us when we tried to record with a script, it doesn't feel natural anymore, and it takes away that conversation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I will say
Yeah,
something that
well,
helped me get over that was actually reading my dialogue out loud, because
yeah.
you can feel it when it's awkward. You're like, oh, I don't want to hear somebody tell me these things.
I would say read your whole book out loud. Maybe we can
Mhm.
find all your narration that's messed up too.
Mm.
Yeah, 100%.
I
Going
think
going back to
another
the dialogue. We just
You
we
too.
just can't do it.
just great lines.
Going back to the poor dialogue that Holly was mentioning. One thing that I picked up from my acting days, I did acting in college, is you need to understand every character's motive. And so you need to understand your motive as an actor. And so when you're writing characters, you need to understand each of their motives for that conversation. Like,
Mhm.
because yes, people do have small talk in everyday life, but that's not something that you want to read a book about. So every conversation should have a motive between the two characters, that each of them is trying to get something from the other character.
That's good.
A
Yeah,
lot
I'll
of
say
people
some-
too.
Holly,
Guys, I
it's
have
Holly's
a lot
turn.
to say.
It's
Okay, go
Holly's
for it,
turn.
Holly. Go for it, Holly. Sorry.
A lot of the coming off the dialogue, it's important, I think, to think about and like you said, have that conversation out loud, because a lot of people will just do their dialogue and say, he said, and then the next person goes, and she said, and then this goes, and then he said. And if you actually act out or talk out your conversations out loud and you think about what do your facial expressions look like, what is what does their facial expression look like when when you say this line or when you say that, because then you can write that into your story and you can take out some of that he said, she said, he said, she said, because that can just be, I know they say that you're supposed to do that because readers will just skim right over he said and just continue on, but it's also really distracting if that's on every other line in your dialogue.
Yeah. And something else I've heard as a good exercise, maybe not to actually have in your book, but like is write a conversation where it's like you have 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, and don't use any dialogue tags with any names, and make their voices unique enough to where I can tell who's talking based off of how they're talking, what they're going after. Cause like I know the characters and I should know their motives, like Matt's talking about. I should know what they're after. So I should be able to tell who is saying what just by the actual context of it all.
Now, Matt, you said your first book the first draft had no dialogue in it. Was that purposeful?
So yeah, so the first chapter, not the entire book.
Ah, excuse me. I thought you wrote an entire book, and I was like, wow, that's incredible.
Just the
Bold
first
choice.
chapter.
Got
There
it,
actually
okay.
is one line of dialogue. It's the very last word of the entire chapter, and it's just a name.
Okay.
But I did that on purpose because I wanted to show the entire chapter is just following basically one solitary guy and what he's going through. So I guess it kind of makes sense that there's no dialogue when you put
No,
it like
it
that.
does. No. I wasn't listening, so I misheard. That goes along with everything else, with starting the podcast late, with forgetting to press record.
Hey, we
And
all have those
now-
days, don't we?
Whew, I'm upside down today. So I'm counting what we have. We have 7 so far. Bad dialogue number 7. So we have room
I
for
do
3 more.
have-
We could do a top 10 common
I
traps.
do have one more thing to say about bad dialogue, because something I've seen as like a common source of it too is that a lot of people hear like about the trap of like, oh, I shouldn't, do heavy exposition, so I'm going to have the characters talk about it. And then it's like characters are just talking about things that they should both know and both be aware of. And it's like, well, why are you having this conversation? It's like, oh, now it's time to go do the thing that we do every evening. And it's like, well, why are you having the conversation if you both know you do it every evening? Like, stop it. And so it's just one of those things. It's like, oh, it's a single teeny tiny solitary step better than just info dumping, but it's really just the same thing with quotes around it.
Yeah. Now I feel in case, because I think this is pretty common, bad dialogue. So if you're really not sure, you're having trouble with this, what are a couple ways where we can fix that problem instead of, hey, showing to someone, they go, yeah, this is bad, like people don't talk like this. Okay, what am I going to do about that?
Yeah, well, I think like
Matt,
Matt
that's for
said.
Matt. That's for Matt.
Okay, okay.
Sorry.
I just want to make sure Holly doesn't have anything to say first.
Yeah, you're right. I should give it to Holly first.
I always have
Um,
something to say. Let's just get that very clear.
Okay.
We all do. We're writers. We always have something to say.
Yeah, back to the ego thing, right?
Yeah.
So like was already mentioned, reading it out loud yourself is a great tool. However, I understand not everybody has the bandwidth to do that or the time. One thing that I did one time, which I should probably do again, was I put it into an AI narrator and it read it back to me. Now, I wouldn't necessarily suggest putting out your books for being narrated by an AI, but it's great to just hear the flow of the sentences, and because they don't really do inflection. So I would even suggest authors should do their own narration because they know the inflection of the characters very well. But just hearing the way the sentence flows, even if it's spoken by an AI, is useful.
And how about you, Holly?
Yeah, I actually agree with that because I went through and I hadn't started any editing on this book, obviously, because I'm not finished it, but I wanted to make some comments when I was kind of having a little bit of block and wasn't feeling motivated to write. And so I use Word and I just did the Word to audio and I listened to my writing. And it was really interesting because I picked up on a few things where I was like, that doesn't sound like I expected. Like it's not flowing properly. And I was picking up on some of my dialogue where it was just like really awkward conversation. So yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Like listen to it, or if you need to, like pull a friend in or, join a writing group and talk it out with a buddy or whatever, and have them like, almost like you're acting, right? Like you read this and I'll read this, and then you can record it and then you can go back and listen to it. And from there you can be like, hey, this is not right, or this is too long, or this is awkward, or even just record yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I can't, overstate how helpful it is to have other people reading your work because, reading it out loud, having it read to you, like all those things are really good. And I was going to say to use the AI tool because I love having it read to me because I'm dyslexic. So if I read something incorrectly, I just assume I read it incorrectly, not that the words were wrong. So having it read to me, I'm like, oh, instantly, so much more recognizable. But having that input for other people, they can also pick up on voices and be like, hey, that doesn't seem like this character would normally use that kind of vernacular or whatever it is, because they get really familiar with it too. And so it's just a great source of like, hey, this is out of character. Like, I mean, people act out of character. It happens in day-to-day life, but it's like, is this appropriately out of character for this character? So like, I think in our most recent group, I had a character that's like normally very like, composed and everything. It was kind of losing it and used the word, like the phrase, don't get it twisted. And it's like, okay, well, maybe they wouldn't go that far in their being upset with somebody, and especially jumping into like modern, lingo. And so it's like, okay, yeah, you're 100% right. That was my goofball mistake on that. So
Okay. Yeah, you know what? And I have a suggestion, which I didn't hear, which is watch movies that have really good writing. Or obviously read books that have really good writing and but for me, I would watch a lot of Quentin Tarantino movies. He is known for his dialogue. He writes very, very well. So I would just sit there and just like listen, and see how they talk and see what they're doing while they talk. And so I'm getting used to, I'm just kind of adding it to my library, I think, of tools.
Yeah. And I think choosing something that's like, okay, this is like very in the vein of what I'm going for in my novel. So whether it's like going for something that's like Quentin Tarantino or like, I really love The Sunset Limited, which, has Samuel L. Jackson in it too. But like, just it's such a unique voice where it's like, okay, if I can find something like that, it's the same thing as like having a soundtrack while you're writing in order to help keep the theme and the mood. You can do that with just whatever you're intaking, whether it's a good book or a movie or whatever.
Right. All right. So that is number 7, bad dialogue. We got number 8, which is.
Well, you said it, so you got to go for it, Bob.
I did. What did I say?
You said
You
number
said
8
which is.
Number 8, which is, I have no idea. I'm just sitting there,
Well, if Holly doesn't have anything
wondering.
to say,
Yeah.
I've got some things.
Okay, Matt.
So far we've been talking mostly about mishaps in the production of the writing. I
Mhm.
think that we can also look at traps in the mentality of writers.
Mm.
One of the things that I had as a poor mentality was I thought I had to have an education before I could write a book. I literally went and got an English degree, and it was near useless. I can write nice looking sentences, but it didn't help with my plot and character at
But
all.
you
So
can
yeah,
probably
so
teach, though. You could probably teach English as a job
I
if you
probably
wanted.
could, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
more than likely.
okay, but I will say your degree is probably more valuable than my
Yes.
painting degree. So
Touche. So that's one thing, you just because you don't feel like you're qualified doesn't mean that you shouldn't sit down and try.
yeah, 100%. I think everybody's like, oh, especially like, even when we talk about ourselves, it's like whether we're published or not, or whether we're traditionally published or indie published, like I feel like almost like indie published is a dirty word still, because it's like, oh, I tell somebody, oh yeah, I published a book, and they're like, oh, did you like got picked up? And I was like, well, I published it myself. And they're like, oh, okay. And it's like that's such a frowned upon thing still, but it's like it's such a different world where it's like, there's pros and cons to both sides of it. And so I think we can get so in our own minds about every little aspect of what it means to be a writer that I think it's just like we want a reason to like have an excuse to go further and do more things. So whether it's, I need to get a degree, or I need to, have a book traditionally published before I can call myself an author.
Yeah.
I think there's always something that we're looking to be like, this is the moment where I make it.
Mhm.
I think another thing as well is falling into the trap of not accepting feedback. And I know that goes both ways, because not all the feedback you receive is going to be good, and it's not always going to be valuable because you're writing a book that's maybe not for everybody. So we have a writing group that has, I think there's 6 of us. And so we all give feedback on a chapter, and we're all really, really good at being able to, it's like constructive criticism, right? Like we know that nobody's out to, we're not all cutthroat and trying to put everybody down and things like that. We're making
Right.
helpful suggestions, and, maybe something that I find is interesting in someone's work, somebody else might not. And so our feedback is always going to be different. And you don't have to make those changes. But I have seen lately so many people on social media be like, oh, there's no point in me having a writing group because all the criticism that I'm getting is just terrible. And these people don't know what they're talking about. Like, that is huge, because if all these people are coming back with the same feedback, maybe it's worth looking at. And that is a big trap, I think, that sometimes people just either don't have thick enough skin, and, or their head's just so big, with that writer's ego, that they're just like, no, this is great. I don't need to do anything about this. This is perfect the way that it is. And that's fine. If you want it to be just the way that you've written it and you're writing it for yourself, that's okay.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if you're putting it out there because you want feedback, then be open-minded about it.
Yeah. And I don't know how, anybody else here feels about feedback or criticism, but like coming out from like the art world, I would say that there are, 2 main veins of criticism. There is subjective criticism, where it's like, oh, I don't know that I like that. I don't like how this was done. And then there's objective things where it's like, this technique that you use was done poorly. And so like in writing, it's like, oh, your grammar is really off and it makes it really hard to understand what's going on. Like that is some objective feedback that, should be weighed a little bit differently than something subjective. It's like, well, I don't know how I feel about that character did that thing that you chose for them to do. And it's like, well, that's what the character would do. So there's different levels of that. And I think having weighing those a little bit differently is important, especially, depending on if it's an alpha reader where it's just like, oh, somebody I know versus like another writer or an editor. Like you should really understand that there are different levels of feedback as well.
Okay.
I'm just giggling because I was thinking, I remember working on it. I remember making a bunch of comments, actually, Austin, on something you had written. And I had made like a suggestion, and then I got an email notification, and it was like, Austin has rejected this.
well, and sometimes it really depends. So like, I
like,
know there's
okay.
well, yeah, it's funny because like I'm writing letters, and so it's like depending on the character, it's like I might be more technically grammatically correct. So it's like if there's an introductory phrase, I will use a comma after it every single time with one of my characters, because it's like, this is the technical rule, so they will have a comma because that is who they are. They're kind of a prick.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, but my other characters like, man, whatever. I don't use commas anywhere. They don't matter to me, because if it's ambiguous, everybody else can deal with it.
Matt, how do you feel about not accepting feedback?
I think you need to learn to accept feedback.
Mm.
But again, going back to, are you doing it for art or are you doing it for a profession, so to speak? Like, if you're doing it for art, yes, it is subjective in a lot of ways. But if you want other people to read it, you do need to get feedback from other people, even if they're not what you would consider experts. I think the fact that someone was like, oh, well, you're not an expert, why should I listen to you? No, but they're still a person with an opinion. And if you want feedback, like if you're going to have 10,000 people read this book, there are going to be other people that think the way that that person does. Now, is it an overwhelming percentage? Probably not, but it's still it's something to consider when you're rewriting.
Yeah, accepting feedback, as I stopped, again, Reddit. Sorry, I keep mentioning Reddit, but somebody
Hey, it's
was
okay.
like, he had a published book and he's like, hey, I'm not making any sales. What is wrong? Let's talk about my cover. What's wrong with my cover? And so the cover was basically it was a photograph of a huge rock on green grass, and with the title and his name. And I'm like, okay, well, is this fantasy or what's it? He's like, no, it's middle grade. Okay, I don't know. There's nothing here that speaks of middle grade. So how about if you add, maybe turn this kind of into like cartoony kind of fun? I mean, I don't know what middle grade kid is going to go, oh, let me read this book. The guy's just got a giant rock. And he's like, no, the rock stays because it's important in the story. Okay, that's fine. So can you add some characters in there that kind of give it, some semblance of middle grade fiction? And he's like, no, I like the way, okay, never mind then, you're done. Because no one's going to buy this book. Just like you're complaining about, because
What's wrong with my cover? But I don't want to change anything about it.
Gosh, so it's it could be frustrating, trying to, because we all want to help. I mean, I'm sure all four of us here, we all want to help each other be successful, but part of that takes, you got to put your ears on and just let somebody, just not trash your stuff, but just tell you, what's wrong with it so you can fix it.
And it's such a hard skill to learn, especially to be, not just gracious, but grateful to hear those negative things, because a negative thing isn't actually a negative. It's a potential positive. It's like, I could take this thing and turn it around and make an improvement, and my work will be better because of it.
Yeah.
Here's a
All right.
suggestion for people that have a hard time getting feedback from people. And I think this suggestion goes hand in hand with editing as well, which is you should distance yourself from it when you're ready to edit it and or get feedback. So give it a few months. I think one of the reasons I have not yet moved on my first novel is because I'm still too close to it. I know it's been a couple years, but emotionally I'm too close to it. I think I am more now ready to get more feedback and edit the crap out of it than I was 2 years ago, though. So now is the time to just tear it up. And I know it sucks because every single word that you wrote, they're your little babies and you don't want to kill them. But sometimes they take up too much space.
Oh man, I will say with enough distance, I'm like, just throw it away.
Babies take up too much space.
Well, that's the thing, is you're right. Getting some distance between yourself and the work really helps, because you improve a lot over time. And I think you can accept criticism more when you are more self-critical in that way, in a healthy way. When you're reading your book and you're like, oh man, I can't believe I was making this mistake over and over and over again in my previous works. But thank goodness I'm where I am now, because I'm making those mistakes less and less. And so I think as we improve, it's easier to see the room for improvement that we have and be a lot more gracious about it. Because if I've come this far in the last 3 years, how much further am I going to be in the next 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just going back to something that you said, Bob, what was important there is that you were stating what the problem is, and you're saying why it's an issue. And I think that's so important when you're the person who's giving feedback, is don't say this character sucks or this book sucks. Say this character needs development, or I don't think that this is working because XYZ. because then you're actually giving constructive criticism. Like you're giving the writers something that they can work off of. Because if you just come out and say this sucks, then they're like, well, why? Like, then that's when people start to get defensive. But if you're actually giving them something that they can improve on, then that's the whole point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Good job. All right. Number 10, last one. We're going to give it to Matt. Matt has a list, and we could probably go to 25 probably, but.
Yeah.
Well, you guys have knocked most of them off, so good job. This one's a little controversial. Some
All
might
right.
say.
Oh, we love that.
I love hot takes.
I have two more. If you want to hear them, if you just want to knock it.
You know what? We're going to do top 10, but then
a bonus.
Honorable mentions.
bonus by Matt Struvan.
This one is more of a psychological, physiological thing.
Ooh.
And I think I've heard it, and I think it's true, so I'm just going to say it. You shouldn't tell too many people. Let me back up. If you are an aspiring author that is having a hard time getting going on your book, this isn't necessarily for people who are consistent in their writing habits. But if you're like, I have a book that I want to write, you're having a hard time sitting down and doing it, don't go tell people and don't brag about it, because apparently when you tell people about it, your brain gets the same dopamine reaction as if you actually did it. And then you're getting this, oh, I actually did it. And then you don't have the desire to do it anymore.
I see that.
That's fascinating. I've never heard that before, but like I could totally see that. Like especially when I'm thinking about like whenever I first started writing, like yeah, like anybody I told about it, especially somebody's like, oh yeah, you'll never finish that, because like one, it's like, oh, I put myself out there and it's either like, oh, that's awesome, and it's like, okay, cool, like I got, like you say, I got the dopamine, I don't need to do it, or I get a, oh, like you're gonna write a book. Like either way, it's a lose-lose. Either I get the dopamine and I don't need to do it, or I get discouraged and I don't want to do it.
Oops.
Yeah.
I just typed all that. Sorry about that. My keyboard. I thought I hit mute. So hit the brakes on telling people you're a new writer. And I feel like isn't there some sort of validation? I mean, when we're new writers, really, really new, we want some sort of, I almost feel that might be part of it. Do you think, Matt, like, or anybody else, like when we share like, hey, I'm going to write a book, it's almost like we want to hear like, oh, good. Yeah. Because we tell them the idea. Yeah. I'm going to have, a brilliant detective and assassin vampire work together to fight bad guys. We want to hear, oh, wow, that's awesome. I hope, it's almost like validation, right?
Yeah. Getting our ego stroked. Back to the ego.
Back to the ego. Yeah.
Yeah, that was exceptionally fascinating. So Matt, in our writers group, I just started, the guys have read my first 2 chapters of my November project. And in our writers group just last week, they did my second chapter. And so the first chapter is from one character's point of view, and the second is from a different character's point of view. And the whole purpose was to start building up the tension between these 2 characters who have never met. And I was so freaking excited because one of the other members of our group was like, I just cannot wait for this character from the first chapter to come in and absolutely just destroy lives. And I was like, yes, because that's like,
Yes.
It made me feel so good to know that I had actually been able to, these characters have never even talked to each other. They don't even know each other exists. And you already know that there's going to be a ton of tension between these 2 characters. And so that is like the perfect example of like, oh yeah, that makes me feel so good. It's absolutely like a total ego stroke, and it makes you want to do more.
Yeah, so like I will say there reaches a certain point where it's like, okay, like once you've got the ball rolling, that stuff really starts helping. So like that's something about like having my Kindle Vela. It's like, I'm supposed to be on a schedule of twice a week, and like it helps knowing like, oh, people are actually reading this. So if I don't publish it, people notice. And like having that thing of like, oh, having people give me feedback and all that stuff, it's really helpful to keep me going once I'm in motion. But like once I'm not, like once I've like taken a break or whatever, taken a step back, then it's like, oh yeah, like, hey, I've got this really cool idea, but like I'm not doing it. So I can see where it's like, as long as you're in motion, it's a positive thing. But if you're not, it just hinders you ever wanting to bother with the extra work of doing the work.
Yeah.
All right, it's good. So we got, let me go down my list again really quick before our bonus. Starting a trilogy, making the first draft perfect, edit as you go, Your characters do have a life in between chapters. Does that sound right, Holly?
Yeah.
Okay. Making one-dimensional characters, too much world building, bad dialogue, need qualifications to write. Does that sound about accurate, Matt, or should it be reworded?
I
Probably.
should say you don't need
You
qualifications.
do
to write
not
to do it.
need. You don't need to be an English major. Not accepting feedback. I think that's a very good one. And then number 10, hit the brakes on telling people you're a new writer. Bonus, Matt.
All right.
Drum roll.
Bonus. Don't compare yourself to other people, and don't get discouraged if you're not famous right away. Especially like if you have
Huge
favorite authors who are, like massive, like Tolkien would be my favorite author. Like if I ever can be compared to Tolkien, I'd be happy. But I cannot compare myself to him right now and be like, oh, I'm writing my book and it's been out for a week and I'm not a millionaire. What's wrong? Like, that's
Well,
a terrible way to look at it. Or for example, for my podcast, like YouTube channels have, sometimes 10, 20, 30 million subscribers and I've got 130. It's like I just can't get discouraged about that. If it's something that's important to you, as writing a book is and should be to a lot of people, you just need to do it. Just sit down and do it every day.
yeah. And I think that comes back to like, why are you doing this? Like, I mean, I didn't even really think about publishing for like 8 years because I was just like, I don't really care. Like, I'm writing this to write it because I think it's fun. And then it's like, enough people read it. And I was like, okay, like, I guess I'll try publishing it. And it's like the idea of like, would you bother writing this if you knew from the beginning you were never going to get published? And it's like, that's a really hard thing to face as a writer. It's like, what is the point if you never get published? And are you okay with that as a result of, at the end of the day, I have books that people may never read?
Mm-hmm.
I told myself that I would still write it even if I never got published. Again, for my own ego, I would print it out and stick it on the wall and frame it and sign it. And I told myself, even if I never get it published, I will do that for myself. So that's been my goal the whole time, and I'll do that someday.
Beautiful. I have heard that JD Salinger did that. I'm pretty sure it was him, that he went to his bank, saved a deposit box. Somebody was, he was holding like a big box, and somebody was like, "Ooh, is that one of your books?" He's like, "Yeah, I just wrote this." And he's like, "Oh, is it going to be published?" "No, it's just for me." And he just went and put it in the safe deposit. I mean, obviously a ego or whatever, but I like that. Just we write just for ourselves, right? Holly, don't compare yourself to others. Don't get discouraged.
It's just command. No question, just command.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah. No,
I think it's really good to remember too that a lot of the books that you read did not look like that when they first started writing it, right? Like these, especially when it's like a traditionally published book that has been like has gone through a ton of editing by huge publishers. That looks way different than when that writer first started.
Yeah, and you just think about the number of hands that have touched that, like the number of like the pairs of eyes that have gone over that. Like you think about alpha readers, beta readers, writing groups, editors. All of that is happening before you get to see it. You don't get to see the rough draft and how rough it was. And so like that was one of my favorite things as being an English teacher, is like we would go through and I would show them like, hey, here's this terrible fan fiction called Repercussions of Evil. And like it is, purposely the worst fan fiction in the world. But then people made, fan fictions of it. There were like these amazing things. It's like, this is what editing does. You can take anything and make it good. You just have to get through your rough draft, and then everybody else is there to help you. It's a community of people. Like you have all these people that are just, on the internet ready to help you make your rough draft into a beautiful final draft.
Yeah. All right, man, that's fantastic. I love these top 10 common traps for new writers. It was fantastic, Matt, having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, that was awesome.
And now
I've never been a guest before. I'm always the host, so it's nice to not have the pressure of having to like come up with a topic. Though Bob did try and push that on me. He was like, "Hey, so what do you want to talk about?" I was like,
"Hello."
No.
I mean, you did carry us through with the bullet points, though.
Yes.
He's like, "This is my first time as a guest. I never want to do this again."
Actually, it's nice. I felt less pressure because, like, if I stop talking, you guys have to figure out what to say. Just like if my guest stops talking, I'm like, well, I guess I'll fill the void. It's easy being a guest.
I actually
why there's three of
prefer
us.
to, yeah, I like to actually wait until you start talking before I do,
Notice.
not until you finish.
That's awesome. Yeah. But Matt, I mean, I would love to have, or we would love to have you on again, if you
Yeah.
would accept our invitation. And next time, we're going to start on time. I will have
Thank you.
reminders, and I will
It's
press the
12:30
record
now.
button. Yeah, it's 12:30. I am so sorry about this. But so at the end of our every episode, we like to talk about don't do this. Now, we kind of were talking about the entire thing, like you alluded to, Matt. But just like some last parting words of don't do this. Anybody have any ideas right now?
Yeah,
Because
I'll jump into it.
oh, I'm Austin. Wow.
Yeah, I'm just gonna boom. Don't overthink it.
Don't overthink it.
Yeah, like I feel like the analysis paralysis is like such a huge thing. Like if you get so in your own head, then it does become easier to just tell people, yeah, like I'm going to write this thing and be happy with that. Just be happy with the idea that one day I'll write this. Just don't overthink it. Don't think about how hard it is. Just sit down and start putting words out there. You don't have to think about where your story's going if you don't want to. If you are just trying to get over the hill of, I need words on the page, then that's the hill you need to get over, and just start stream of consciousness, writing whatever, like write about your day, write whatever gets words on the page so you get used to the habit of writing. That is what it takes to be a writer, is to write. So just do it. Don't overthink it.
Don't overthink it. All right. Good job. Uh-oh.
I don't know what's going on. What's happening? Ah,
We're fine, Holly. Everything's
good.
okay,
Don't
Holly.
it's so weird.
Holly?
My computer just like slid down and it was like, slide
Don't
to
trust
shut down
Holly
your
for
PC.
technology.
Nope.
Didn't even touch it this time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I will say, don't come up with a really cool phrase for your book and then use it a whole bunch of times.
I like that. I'm trying to think of like what would be an example.
I know we talked about this before, but I read this book and the line was something was floating on a phantom wind.
Okay.
And the first time I read it in this book, I was like, oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And then the second time I read it in the same book, I was like, okay. And then like the third time, the third time I was like, how is this a bestseller? Tell me literally anything else at this point.
I will say,
That's
Holly, you are
hilarious.
so down on my love of autocrit, but autocrit will be like, what the hell are you doing?
What are you
You've used
doing?
this phrase 8 times. Stop it.
Yeah.
That's funny. Matt, you have one?
I do.
Okay.
Watch
Oh,
out,
no, it's
guys.
supposed to be a
Double
don't.
negative incoming. Oh, before I tell you my double negative, I have to be a little snarky and say, don't invite someone on a podcast, then be late, and then forget to press record.
Oh, perfect.
Ooh.
Wow.
Ooh, got you,
Double
Bob.
burn. Double burn. Got me.
My double negative is don't not do it. Whether you are doing it for art or for business, you need to just do it either way. Because if it's a business, you need to put food on the table. And if it's for art, the world needs more art. And you probably won't stop thinking about it for 30 years. And you don't want to be on your deathbed and be like, I wish I would have written that book.
Yeah, that'd be horrible. Because I'm almost there. I'm 53, so I am so close to
Almost
death.
there.
I am so
Wow,
close to
Bob.
death. I'm like, I'm trying to get
So
this journey.
close.
I'm trying to tell you like what's coming ahead,
Enter Act 3.
Just like the end of Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men, where the dad goes ahead with the torch. I'm trying to let you guys know what's ahead here. Anyways, death. So don't. Yeah, I would say don't listen to the naysayers, because you're new and you want to write. And I know you're probably asking people, should I write a book? Or just everyone here is pretty much saying the same thing. Just sit down, just start writing, okay? Because every single person, Stephen King, J.R.R. Tolkien, George Martin, everybody started somewhere, okay? There was no brilliance anywhere. In fact, I think G. Martin, who's
George R.R. Martin.
Thank you. I know somebody like that. I got mixed up with J.R. Anyway.
Yeah, there's
So
a lot of initials being thrown around.
Yeah, he wrote screenplays for years. Okay, before he penned his epic what is that, 8 books or something. So please, everyone starts with a day one. All right, don't don't think like you're any different, or that you're less than anyone else here. Just sit down and just put the blinders on and start writing. And it's a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun doing this.
And you know,
It's frustrating. We do want to tear our eyeballs out sometimes. That is true, and we do drink probably too much bourbon. But it's a blast. I'm having a blast writing books. Too much bourbon. Okay. Yeah. So that's it. Thank you so much for joining us for this. Matt, where can people find you?
They can find me again. I'm not going to give you my address. Stop asking.
one day you're gonna slip up.
MJ Struvan on Instagram, or author interviews with MJ Struvan on YouTube. And someday you'll find my books in store. And when people say I want to be a great author like Tolkien and Martin and MJ Struvan.
MJ Struvan. Yes.
Getting it done.
That'd be so exciting. I just can't wait. Yeah, for your book, for Holly's book, Austin, for your book. That'd be so exciting.
It's just so nice to hold it in your own hands. Like,
yeah,
even if nobody buys it, there is something about it. Like you were saying, Matt, like just for yourself. Like, I wrote that, and it's like so nice.
I interviewed a guy a couple weeks ago. Now look at Bob's just rubbing it in our face. Nice, dude. I interviewed a guy a few weeks ago who was telling me about his unboxing experience, and I was just getting jealous, and it's like, okay.
Yeah.
I asked for a new bookshelf for Christmas this year, and I got it. And Santa was really nice to me. And so I put all of my books up on the shelf and stuff. And I actually have Bob's first book, and I have Austin's first book, and I put them on like the place of honor up on the top shelf of my bookshelf. And my husband comes out, and he's got like this one book that he owns. And it was actually given to him by somebody else, so he doesn't even own it. But anyways, he's like, I'm gonna put this up here, this is where it's gonna go. And I was like, that shelf is not for you. That shelf is not for you. This is the shelf for Bob and Austin.
Yeah.
No, the top shelf is where you keep the boring healthy cereal. Like we're just up there where nobody ever wants to touch it.
The teas. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, and we will definitely have Matt on again. We'll definitely start on time and all that.
As long as he accepts us.
As long as he doesn't ghost us. So don't forget to write and describe to our channels at the links below, and I'll also have all of Matt's links below in case you're on YouTube, so you don't miss any of the Writer's Realm content. We always love to hear from our listeners, so if you have a question or topic you want us to dive into, please get in touch. Until then, au revoir.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.